Welcome to Legally Agile with Chris Werner.
If you're building AI tools or you're using software that incorporates AI, there's a good chance you've signed a contract with terms that are going to surprise you. Not scare you, but surprise you. AI contracts look like ordinary software contracts, but here's the difference. AI contracts are hiding something under the hood. They're hiding risk allocation, your risk allocation. And if you're not aware of that, you may find out that you have more risk than you thought only when it's too late. My name's Chris Werner. I'm the founder of Vidar Law, and these are the kind of issues I talk about with my clients all the time. So today I want to go through what are AI contracts and give you a game plan for how to look at those contracts, how to evaluate your risk in those contracts, and give you the signals of when you need to call an attorney for more help on those agreements. All right, let's dive into the types of AI contracts that you're going to see. So I categorize these into three different types of contracts. And that may be surprising because most people think, well, it's just a contract with an AI. But let me tell you the categories. Okay, the first category is your AI vendor contracts. So those are the contracts you're signing with the vendors of the products you're using all the time. Think your ChatGPT, your Claude, those types of things, right? Those are one type of AI agreement. The second type of AI agreement that you're going to deal with is if you are building a product using AI, or you're incorporating AI into your product, or you're incorporating an output of an AI into something you're delivering to your clients, then your agreements with your clients are also AI agreements, right? They deal with issues relating to those AI tools. So your master services agreements, your terms of service, those types of things, those are also AI contracts. And your third type is if you are building something with an API on top of a platform, you now have your API agreement. And that's, again, a third type and a different type of AI agreement, right? So that's the landscape. And unfortunately, a lot of founders and executives look at all those agreements like they're just basic SaaS agreements, and they treat them that way. They skim them, they click through, and they sign, and they never think about them again. But that's where your risk lies, because within those agreements are real terms that actually matter, what's going on within the AI and within what you're delivering to your clients. So those agreements require a little more careful attention beyond just click through, go. Now, I understand that everybody's busy, especially founders, especially if you're in a fast growing company. So what I want to give you next is I'm going to give you the 5 clauses that you should pay special attention to in your AI agreements. Now, these aren't the only 5 things that you want to look at. It pays to give some careful attention and some scrutiny to the entire agreement. But if you pay attention to these 5 places, this is where I see a lot of risk for companies. And this is where if you get these things right, you're going to avoid a lot of that risk that might otherwise be there. All right, let's talk about those 5 clauses that are the important ones to catch. Number 1 is training data rights. So we've all heard about this, right? Like, can the LLM train on your data? This means that they're going to take your data and use it to improve or better their model so that their model can respond better. In theory, that sounds fine, but for your business, that may not be a good idea. Now, some of the agreements are great, right? They explicitly say your data will not be used to train our model. A lot of times that requires a certain level of service from the AI provider, so a professional level or something like that. If they explicitly aren't training on your data, great. Next best would be if it's saying you can opt out. So there's an explicit opt-out provision. You need to be aware of that because you're going to need to take some additional actions to make sure you're actually opting out of that. If you don't have either of those, what you want is to understand what exact data they're taking and what they're not taking. And unfortunately, for some agreements, that may be hard to find because the exact definition of the data they're taking may be buried in a definition of data or information or something else in the agreement. So you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper on that and figure out exactly what it is. And the reason that this is important is you may be handling sensitive information for your clients, right? And that may be going into your AI vendor's software. Now, you need to make sure that that data is being handled carefully. It's all well and good for your own data to be in there, but if your client's data is in there, that may be a real risk, and it may be a disconnect between what the AI is doing with that data you're putting in and the agreement you've signed with your client. All right, the next contract provision you've got to pay attention to is output ownership. Who owns the AI output? Some platforms and tools are very good about this. They're explicit and say that you own the output. Others, it's a little more difficult to understand who does and doesn't own the output and have a right to do with what they want. And there are some AI vendors who will say they get to use any output that you've created for their own purposes and for anything they want. Now, here's where the problem lies with this type of agreement, right? If you are using that AI output to sell to your clients or to incorporate into a deliverable for your client, the question of who owns that output is a real legal question with real legal consequences. And you need to understand what you do and do not own. You'd hate to sell to one of your clients something that it turns out later you didn't own or have a right to sell to them. That's going to be a disaster for your business. So, what should you be looking for? In those clauses, you want to look for explicit statements that you own the output of that AI product, right? Whatever that output is, whether it's code, image, text, whatever, you want to make sure that you own that output. And if there isn't an explicit statement about ownership of the output, it's worth having that conversation before you sign that agreement. All right, the third point, and this one is interesting because it's often ignored, but I find that this can be the one that can cost companies the most money. And that is indemnification asymmetry, meaning that the indemnification provision isn't the same. What you're indemnifying your AI vendor and what they're indemnifying you don't match at all. So most of your AI vendor agreements are going to have an indemnification provision, and they're probably going to read something like this. You are agreeing to indemnify the AI vendor for things like intellectual property that you've put in or any other inputs that you put into the AI. And you're also going to indemnify the vendor for any use of an output of that AI. So if you're creating something and then using it, putting it out into the market, if there's a lawsuit against the AI vendor, you're indemnifying that vendor for your use of their product. And generally, there is no cap on the amount of money that you can be liable for under that indemnification. On the other side of the equation, the AI vendor is going to limit its indemnification obligation to you. Generally speaking, in those agreements, they're capping their liability at something like 1 to 3 months of fees that you've paid for use of that. So you can see pretty quickly the difference between your unlimited potential liability to the AI vendor versus their very limited cap on what they might owe you if something bad happens from something they've done. Now, I don't want to suggest that these provisions are unconscionable or anything like that. In fact, these provisions are very, very common in software agreements. But especially when we're talking about AI agreements, you need to understand what that liability means. And you need to plan to protect yourself, especially with respect to your clients downstream that you're selling to. Fourth provision you want to pay special attention to in AI agreements, and that is model changes or updates. So most of the agreements, your AI vendor is going to say something along the lines of they have the right at their sole discretion to change or update or replace a model whenever they want to. All right. Now, we've seen these models go through updates. They change, things go differently all the time. Here's where the problem is, and I've seen this happen. So let's say you're a company and you have built on a particular model. You've built something that is providing an output for your customers or providing some kind of service for your customers, and everything works well with that model. And then the company, your AI vendor comes and updates the model or changes it. And maybe it's even a minor change. But I have seen a company where that minor change came in and the model's behavior changed. And now their product is no longer working the way it's supposed to. This is a huge risk to your company, and you have absolutely no control over it. So what do you want to look for? What do you want to do? A couple of things in this provision. You want to look for a model change clause that provides you with some notice and a definitive time period if the company is going to update or change their model. So you want to make sure that there's enough time there that you can deal with that. And the other thing is you want to see if you can get legacy rights to continue using the older model during some transition period. That will give you enough time if you have built on an old model to test the new model and make sure it will continue to work in the way that you're expecting, in the way that you want, before you're forced to change from the old model to the new. All right. The fifth and final contract provision that you want to pay attention to is data residency and security. All right. Now, probably a lot of you that are watching have heard the horror stories about, data going crazy all over the place with this AI, that no one knows where it is and what's going on. This is a real problem. So let me set the stage here. You have signed an enterprise agreement, or you've signed a contract with a government entity, or maybe it's a highly regulated industry, like you've signed a contract with a healthcare company. Those contracts are going to require you to do very specific things with their data. They're going to want to make sure that, like, for example, maybe they want the data to reside in the US all the time. Maybe they want to make sure that the data is always encrypted, both when it's at rest and when it's moving through a system. They also will probably have very specific security requirements for that data and want to be able to audit that security from time to time. Now you've signed that agreement. Now you've signed a vendor agreement with your AI company. And all of a sudden, those terms may be very different. The data may move through different jurisdictions that you weren't expecting. The security on that data may be sufficient, but it may not match with what you've agreed to with your customers. And that's a real gap that is not only a risk to you, but it may be a breach of contract and a real legal liability for your company if you're not aligning those terms. So what do you want to look for in that? Sometimes it may be a data addendum in the contract that specifically describes what happens to the data. But what you're looking for is, where does the data reside? How does the data move through the system? What are the specific security measures in place to protect that data? And you want to make sure that if they have security in place, that you can provide audit reports from the AI vendor to your customer. If you can do all those things and match it up, then you're in much better shape. Okay, so we've gone through sort of what the types of AI agreements that you may be touching are. I've talked through 5 important clauses that you want to make sure that you're dealing with. So what do you do? Like, what do you do now? All right, so a couple of things that you can do right away to make sure that you're ahead of most people on your AI agreements. Number 1, audit what you have. So take your top 3, 4, 5 agreements for AI vendors that you're using, you and your team are using all the time to deliver to your client. Audit those and audit those 5 provisions that I've talked about, right? And see what those terms are and see if that's matching with what your clients are doing. Number 2, any new agreements, make sure you're looking at these important things before that. If you'd like a checklist, I have one available at my website at vidarlaw.com/resources. It's an AI contracts red flag. You can download, no obligation, and it gives you a handy little way to run through those agreements when you get them in place. And the third thing you should do right now, if you have AI agreements and vendor contracts, you need to look and make sure you're closing the gap between those 2 agreements, that they are talking the same way and providing the same level of protection, and that you don't have any gaps. If you're unsure of how to do this or where to start, or you think you may have some risk, you should be contacting your attorney. If you'd like to talk to me, you can reach out at my website, vidarlaw.com, and schedule a call with me. We can go over things. We can do a quick consultation and figure out if you do need help and what you need help with. So bottom line is, you now have a playbook to run through your AI agreements. If you run through this playbook and use this with all of your agreements, you're going to be ahead of most of your competition. This isn't something to be afraid of, but it is something that requires a little more attention than you might normally get. If you have found this useful or have more questions, please feel free to reach out to me. This is what I do all the time, working with clients and making sure they have what they need and that they are not incurring or building up an unnecessary amount of risk in these AI agreements. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.